I would like to introduce you to Dr. John Osborne and his lovely and feisty and fabulous wife, Valerie Osborne. Welcome.
Okay, John and I went to visit New Orleans just after Halloween last year, and I must admit I wasn't terribly keen on going, because, but we were pushed into it a little bit because we had booked a trip earlier in the year that I had to cancel because I had a bad hip and we couldn't use the flight. So John found out that if we didn't use the credit for this flight that we lost, we would be out of so many $100. So he said, we've got to use it before the beginning of December. Where shall we go? And he's usually the tour guide, so he came up with New Orleans, which in England you call New Orleans. You pronounce it a little differently there. But anyway, I was a little bit, I'm not too sure. But I couldn't have been more wrong, because it was a fascinating place. We'd never been to Louisiana before, and we might not go again, but we really found that we enjoyed it a great deal. And there was so much history there that we, as history buffs, we had plenty to munch on. So a little bit about, you want to show the picture of the French building? Okay. We're going to talk a little bit about the center part of New Orleans, which is called the French Quarter. 35 years after France claimed the Louisiana Territory, John Law, a Scotsman, got a charter from the Duke of Orleans to found La Nouvelle Orleans, the New Orleans. It was sold. It was a con job, actually. It was sold to investors. Come to this wonderful new land, sort of flowing with milk and honey and riches and ore. You will make your fortune. Actually, it was a swampy, ill, provoking, just a nasty territory, and nobody found out until they came here. But this John Law, the Scotsman, managed to spin his web and get investors to invest for him and to come over. And they were very disappointed when they got here. But the Mississippi bubble was a pyramid scheme, regardless. In 1718, the first governor came with 6 carpenters and 30 convicts, and they began building the town on a 66 square grid, which is one, you will see this grid in a moment from John. Okay. Okay.
The other piece that I thought was interesting was the description of the territory in 1721. It was a place of 100 wretched hovels in a malarious wet thicket of willows, dwarf palmettos infested by serpents and alligators. That was the description of it. Much of the colonial population in the early days was of the wildest and in part of the most undesirable character. Deported galley slaves, trappers, gold hunters. The colonial governor's letters were full of complaints regarding the riffraff sent as soldiers as late as the 1750s. Now, what is interesting too is the particular area was very malarious, and as a result, and yellow fever, and as a result it was a population sink. People migrated there, and about 2/3 of the population died of disease within about 2 or 3 years. So it was not all that it was cracked up to be. Okay, so we'll start the show and give you a sense of what's going on here. If I can get my act together.
And this is where I tell my story.
Yes,
Yes.
You can tell your story anytime you like.
Okay, so New Orleans really was a city that was born in sin. It was the place to go to have a really good time.
It hasn't changed much.
And it hasn't changed. It's still got that reputation. But anyway, one of the true stories that happened there was that, gambling went on almost every building and every corner of the city. But according to one classic story, the only honest game in town. Among the scores frequented by the riverboat men was found in a small roulette house on, it's hard to pronounce, Chapulota Street. Chapulota Street. It was operated by a Frenchman named Grumpin, who allegedly went bankrupt. He was doing very well, but he went bankrupt suddenly in a very strange manner. And this is what happened. Among his regular customers was a boat captain. Who came in every night that he was in New Orleans, and he always bet the same amount, a huge amount of 25 cents. He always bet, never more and never less, on on roulette. One night, the captain sat down, he placed his bet, and then he leaned his head on his hand like this, and on went the game, while Grumpin spun the wheel. He placed it on red, and red won. And the captain's money was doubled. He had 50 cents now. But since he didn't pick up his winnings, the captain spun the Grumpin spun the wheel again. Once more, the ball stopped on red, and the old man's money doubled yet again. Again and again and again and again. Now, nervous Grumpin spinning the wheel, he looked at the riverboat captain, and he was still there with his head on his hand and doing nothing. As long as he was doing nothing, that meant carry on. And supposedly the captain was unconcerned about this great streak of luck. Anyway, everybody around started watching and were very concerned about this great streak of luck. After 16 turns of the wheel, when the captain's winning amounted to more than $8,000 after his 25 cents beginning, on the original investment of a quarter, Grumpin sort of threw up his hands. He pushed all his money that he had across the table at the old man and said, "Get up and go, you know, I'm going to be out of business, get up and go." But as he pushed the elbow open, the old man went, going. He was dead. He fell out onto the floor. With great speed and alacrity, the several members of his crew who had come with him immediately scooped up all the money, gathered up his body, and galloped out of the roulette room, taking all the winnings, and they rushed out of the place. Grumpin had been bankrupted by a dead man.
Good story.
I'm so glad we got that over. Okay. Here's the first site. It's hard to realize, but essentially New Orleans is a fairly complicated city. It's located in this point, around this area here, and it's surrounded, essentially you can see it's surrounded by large amounts of water. Lake Pontchartrain is north of it, and also Lake Bourges is over here. So it's, I just wanted to show you what it looks like from the air. When you look coming down to it, you see masses of quantities of water and pine trees and the like. So we'll move along here, if I can find my act together here. Here we go. This is the French Quarter. It's called the Crescent City because it's located on this bend in the river, a crescent essentially. And this is the French Quarter. It's a very small area in here. And this is the area that was flooded, and we'll talk about that later. Okay. And this is just a picture of all of the activities that goes on in New Orleans, all the historical locations, all the things that are of interest, and you can see it's quite enormous. And now we come to this little ditty here, if I can.
Jackson Square first, I think.
Yeah, well, hang on a minute. I've got that there. It shouldn't be there. Okay, I'll go back to that. Okay, so
Jackson Square.
no, it's not ready.
All right.
New Orleans by the 1830s was a very prosperous city. Cotton, sugarcane, and the like was a tremendous asset, and it was the third largest city in the United States, and it was extremely profitable. And this shows essentially some of the slave quarters on the outskirts, but this, I think, shows you the example of how much activity was going on in the port. This is all cotton, and all these ships lined up to take, as you can see, as far as the eye can see, along Lake Pontchartrain, which had all of these, all of this cotton being taken out of the south. So it was an incredibly wealthy city. Now we get to Bourbon Street, and here you go, Valerie.
Now, Bourbon Street was named not for the drink, but for the French royal family, the Bourbons. And it's now the most famous party street. One of the places on Bourbon Street was owned by two pirates named Jean and Pierre Lafitte. They were said to have conducted their smuggling business out of the back of this blacksmith shop. Ironically enough, General Jackson used them to help him win the war. Was it the 1912? 1814 war. And he had the pirates volunteered to help him win that war. And we'll tell you more about that later. Okay.
Okay. This is just a couple of, no, we're not there yet. This is just a couple of shots walking along Bourbon Street. You can see the boutique type places as well as the drunken hovels as well. Okay, now we get to Jackson Square, which is essentially the center, originally known as the Place d'Armée, because that's where the French would essentially have their troops march up and down and exercise their military exercises. And then later on became Jackson Square after, of course, New Orleans fell to the British in 1815. Okay, keep going.
Well, we have a question.
Yeah? Bruce has a question. Yeah?
What's the name of that cathedral?
Oh, gosh. Good
No, that's all
question.
right. No, I only know you're not bringing this up because I was in the Air Force and stationed in Mississippi, so a couple of weekends when we drove down to New Orleans. I was educated in a parochial school, grammar school. So we got to see that page, so I said, I want to see what it was all about. So I went in and went down to the front seat, and there's three black nuns working on the altar. I never saw, Afro-American nuns before. I'm just looking at them like that, I came over and they said, what's the matter? I told them, I'm a Yankee from up north. I said, I've never seen, I used the word black, I didn't know any different. Black said, well, they laughed, they get the biggest charge out of that. They were very, very nice. I apologize, but I just really took me by surprise. And walking, I've seen it when, down there, you can walk along one of the side streets and you see a house, a really small farm, and like a stream of water from the Mississippi River. I walked by and there's an alligator just sunning himself right next to the house. I thought that was funny.
Yeah. Great. Okay, Jackson Square, as John mentioned, originally was called the Place des Armes, and that's where the troops trained and marched up and down, as he said. It was renamed Jackson Square for General Jackson after the war of 1812? 1812. And this square is what they call the heart of New Orleans. We sat in that, we sat in, wait a minute.
There's the inside of the...
Oh, that's the inside of the cathedral that you were talking about?
That's it, yeah.
Absolutely beautiful cathedral.
Now here's Valerie sitting in the square.
Now you can see around the sides are two levels. The buildings going all the way around were 2 levels, and they're very attractive with iron balustrades and ironwork, and it's really beautiful. And it wasn't like that in its early days. This was the haven of prostitutes and people of ill repute of all sorts. And then what happened was a young woman by the name of the Baroness Michaela Pontalba, her father owned much of the acreage around this square. And anyway, she had an unfortunate episode in her life, but managed to come out of it on the right side. The Baroness Montalba, which you see here, can you make it bigger, John?
No, I can't. I could with my computer, but not with this
Okay.
one.
Okay, this is the Baroness Montalba. You will see that she's got her fingers sort of underneath a fold of her dress there, her satin dress. And that is part of the story.
Maybe I can.
She was married off to a cousin of hers in France.
Oh, I got it. Here you go.
Okay, there you go. See, she's hiding her finger a little bit under the
There.
fold.
Right there.
She was married off to a cousin in France, and it was the most disastrous marriage because the son had just married her for her money, and he and his father had come up with a plot. And what they decided to do was, soon after they got married, they thought, if she dies, we inherit all her property. We'll do very well. They attacked her, shot a couple of her fingers off, and I think she got wounded in the back as well, but somehow she managed to escape. And that's why she's hiding her finger underneath the fold of her dress, because one of her fingers was almost shot completely off. But she was quite a gal. She managed to escape, came back to the United States, came back to New Orleans, and started working. When her father passed away and she inherited his property, she remembered some of the architecture and the ironwork that she had seen in France and said, this square is such an ugly looking square and it's in such disarray and disrepair. She said, I want to put my money into making it a handsome looking square, and she used some of the designs that she had seen in Paris for the ironwork, which hadn't been seen before. And you can see some of it in the distance there. So there's a lot of fancy ironwork, wrought ironwork in New Orleans. So
On the square is this marvelous museum, and it's 3 floors. And the first floor you go in, and it takes about an hour and a half to go around it if you're conscientious. And so the second floor, we were exhausted after doing about 2 hours in there. So we decided to come back home, etc. And then I said, well, we'll do that a little later. The second floor, it's probably not that much. So we did a little skirt through the second floor. There wasn't much there. I said, fine, we can do that later. So we did the second floor much later. Then we get to the third floor. Unbelievable. The third floor was twice as big as the first floor. And so it took us something like 3 hours to do it. And in the end, we actually had to give up because there was still so much to read and look at. And so we left there totally exhausted. But it's an absolutely marvelous museum. If you ever get a chance to see the story of New Orleans, this is the place to go. It's in the northwest corner, which is this white building right here. This is the museum.
it's right next to the,
Right next to this.
cathedral.
Just to the left of the cathedral. Well worth seeing. Absolutely marvelous.
And,
Okay.
one of the things that we found really useful was this. Some of you have seen these before, yeah? This was a folding walking stick and seat. And we can't stay on our feet as long as we used to. So I found this is John's because it's sturdier. We've got another one that's lighter. But so this is a folding seat. And you sit on it with this in front of you, sort of like this.
Straddle.
Yeah.
And it's
just like-
perfect for
and it's
museum
perfect.
watching.
Yeah.
It's really
Absolutely,
perfect.
because you're just at the right level, and also I would recommend anybody who does a lot of walking and likes museums and things to get something like this. You can get them online and so on. This one is steel. I've got another one that's aluminum, which is lighter for me, and they're just absolutely wonderful. And we could have, if we'd made these, we could have gone into business in New Orleans. Because so many people said, where did you get that? I must get one for myself or my mother or my aunt or whatever. They hadn't seen them down there, so we should have gone into business there. Anyway, so they're well worth having.
Now, in Jackson Square, it's sort of well known, there's a pattern of behavior. The behavior is the following. You don't get up in the morning because the trucks are coming into Bourbon Street, loading all the bars up with booze and whatever, and the garbage trucks are coming in and getting all the stuff out. But things start to hot up sometime around, I'd say after 12 o'clock. And that, the first hotting up, so to speak, is done in the square when these people who are playing quite often in the bands in Bourbon Street in the night are practicing in the afternoon. And they come and practice in the square, just in front of the cathedral, interestingly
They put their
enough.
hats on too.
And it's great to listen to them. And you can listen to them from about 12 o'clock till about 6 o'clock in the evening. And then, of course, then they pack up and they get ready to go down for the big run on the
Can I
town.
mention the opera again?
Yeah, hang on, he's coming right up.
All right.
And this is one of the guys that we were entranced with. He's called New Orleans Opera Guy. He is. And if you ever go on YouTube, you can actually find him and listen to him, and he's absolutely fantastic.
He sings opera music, and you are entranced by it. He really is. He's good enough to be on the stage, and I think he is at times. But all these folks, of course, have their hats out. They have a hat on the floor.
Barrel here on his
a
bike.
barrel, yeah. Throwing in. He's thinking positively, so he had a big bucket on his bike there, so throwing. But he sang there. We were aiming to go into the museum, but he was right in front of the museum, and we said, we can't leave while he's still singing. He's so good. He was absolutely wonderful.
Okay, moving right along. Okay, next we're going to go take a trip down the river. Now, what was interesting was there was a fellow there who was giving a guide a talk about New Orleans history, and he was incredible. I mean, he was so knowledgeable, and we were just fascinated by all the stories that he gave us. And we went down this river to the battlefield where the great battlefield of New Orleans. This is the battlefield, and I'll explain that in a minute. Are you going to talk about it?
Yeah,
No? Okay. Okay, I don't know if you're familiar with the Battle of Gettysburg, where the Southern Confederates crossed the cornfield to the northern troops of Maine and Pennsylvania, and essentially get defeated essentially on that cornfield. Well, the same action was going on here prior to Gettysburg in New Orleans, and the blue area was the American defenses, and this was the British attacking, and they lost terribly. There's one case where essentially a whole battalion of Scots Guards lost all their officers, and because there was no one giving them instruction, they were mowed down to the last man. So it's a rather sad story, but as I said,
from our point of view.
from our point of view.
Loss of life is a sad story, no matter
Yes.
which side you're on.
Absolutely.
While I was down there, I went to one of those museums, and the museum curator was telling me there's a lot of French Huguenots in the
Oh, yeah.
okay. When France was Catholic, when the Protestants broke out, they were banned from France, and they came to Canada, and they were mistreated in Canada. So Lafitte came down, right down all the way and settled in this right at the Gulf of Mexico. When the Revolutionary broke out, Britons had 8 ships going to go up to the Mississippi River. And they just get into the Mississippi River. Lafitte sunk all 8 of them, and they're still down there. All 8 ships were sunk.
Wow,
Wow,
I didn't know. Interesting.
great.
So, any rate, that was the defeat of the Brits in 1815.
Can I mention about Jackson here a little bit? So the leader of the American troops was Major General Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson was born in the Carolinas, but he was captured as a child during the Revolutionary War by the British, leaving him with a great dislike of the British. He was orphaned at age 14 and was promoted to general in the War of 1812. Does anybody know what his nickname was? Old
Old
something.
Hickory.
Old Hickory. Why was he called Old Hickory? Anybody have an idea? It's because hickory is a very tough, hard wood, and he was considered a real tough cookie. So he was called Old Hickory because of, and later on, because of his valor in the War of 1812, what job did he end up with?
President of the United States.
President of the United States in 1828. Okay.
Okay. This is us, by the way, and with me with my New Orleans football helmet, football cap, the Saints, I think they're called, wearing that.
Oh, you were wearing a Saints cap?
Yes.
Whoa.
And I liked it because it had a fleur-de-lis on it.
We liked it. We didn't care about the game.
Okay.
John Osborne, a Saint. Wow.
Yeah, how about that? Okay.
Okay, this is a picture of the cooking guy, I'll tell. And you know, New Orleans has a reputation for great food, and it has. And it has cooking schools there. Now this was taken in the New Orleans School of Cooking and the Louisiana General Store. So you walk into this general store, which is absolutely wonderful, full of everything for cooking and southern cooking. And then there's a big room behind it about the size of this room, with a stage at this end, and round tables with people like yourselves, all sitting at the round tables. And a gentleman comes out behind the stage here, comes up, and so he's looking down at you, and he gives you a lesson in Cajun cooking. The first cooking school was founded in New Orleans in 1722, and the tradition continues in this building, which originally was the molasses warehouse. The class there takes 2 to 3 hours, which is what we were there, and he cooked gumbo and jambalaya, and he showed us how to do that. And then the people who were watching were served, and you ate the gumbo and the jambalaya, and it was wonderful. But the other thing that was wonderful was this guy. He could have had his own comedian. He was a comedian par excellence. He could have had his own show. But he was, you can see the size of the
Linebacker plus.
He was absolutely huge, because I'm only 4'9", but he looked about twice my size. But he was funny and charming, and he did a wonderful job there. Okay.
Okay, after that, we will sit, our digs were on St. Charles Avenue, and this is a streetcar route, and interestingly enough, traveling around New Orleans for old people is fantastic, a hell of a deal, because 40 cents to go into the town, 40 cents to come out, so when the pair of us going in, it cost us 80 cents in, 80 cents out. That wasn't a bad deal. $1.60 a day, I thought, was pretty reasonable. So one didn't really need a car, and so the western part of where we were staying was, it's hard to see that New Orleans, as I said, is, how can I put it? The area close to the river is high, and the original land close to the river, that crescent I showed you, were plantations. And plantations of sugarcane and cotton and whatever. This area then was gradually taken over, these plantations were taken over, and beautiful houses placed along this area to the west of the French Quarter. And we went around here, and this is where some of the fairly well-to-do, for instance, Sandra Bullock has a house there and a few others. Interesting enough, the houses were beautiful, but the roads were in terrible shape. And that was, really showed the incompetence or the corruption, essentially, of city governments in New Orleans. It's rather sad, that part. Yes.
The young man who was giving us a tour here, and again you can see the black ironwork that you see all over New Orleans. The young man who was giving us a tour was very direct about it. He said New Orleans government is totally corrupt. And he said, just watch where you're walking on the street, because everything with potholes and broken up. Outside these absolutely beautiful houses. And he said, you don't know where your money is going. When you're paying your taxes, it's going into somebody's pocket. Yeah. And we know it, and we keep trying to keep trying to elect better people. And somehow they seem to go the same way. Within a few years, they're corrupt too, and they're up on charges. But anyway, so here are some of the beautiful
Some of the houses. Now, next to those houses is the municipal cemetery, and we're going to enter that now.
Can I just mention something first? Just something I forgot to mention about the cooking school and so on. You know, New Orleans has a reputation for being the breeding ground for many great chefs. Emeril Lagasse is one of them that you would have heard about. He was the executive chef at a famous restaurant called Commander's Palace. Then he opened 3 restaurants, and he makes his headquarters in New Orleans. Emeril's restaurant calls the cuisine New Orleans. Creative dishes in the style of Southwestern, West Coast Oriental, or even New England cooking, but with a Creole twist. So there are many other famous chefs that have made their headquarters there, and he's one of them. Okay.
So we're moving on now to the cemetery area, and you can see here I am standing under a live oak, and this is the cemetery area. Now, what is interesting is, one, they put these bodies, which finally were decaying, in this vault. And why did they do that? Well, one, the groundwater was fairly high, so one of the problems is that when you bury somebody, if there's a lot of water around, they have a tendency to float up. By the way, that occurred constantly in Ipswich in the early days of the settlers. At any rate, these were designed to be sealed. Inside, they have a marble exterior, but inside are bricks. And the body was placed in here, and the temperatures in New Orleans in the summertime reach up into the 90s and the like. And what happens is the bodies essentially get cooked. And essentially everything decays extremely rapidly. So they would have family vaults of this type, and then the one body would decay within a year or two, and then second you'd open up again, and then you'd put another of your family members in and cook them again, you know. So that's the way they handled it. Okay.
Okay, another thing is, if you took tasty, isn't it?
It's my kind of story.
I love the goose and stuff. But if that front marble was opened, you would find on most of them 3 different levels of areas where bodies could be put in. And there are 2 reasons why the tombs were built above ground. John mentioned one, which was the water table, but that wasn't the only one. Remember, a lot of these folks that historically came from France, and they brought the French custom, which was to build tombs above ground, not below ground. So they copied that system as well. But these were called cities of the dead. And so these tall tombs had 3 different levels. And this was the custom of using that. The wooden coffin of a newly buried person would be put on the top level, the penthouse suite, let's call it, all right? After a year and a day, if the vault is needed, if you need somebody else's ready to move in and they need the penthouse, that coffin is moved to level 2, and then down to level.
And there's a good reason for that.
Why?
The decay process is occurring more rapidly the higher you are because the heat rises.
Right.
And there are also wall vaults, which was a sort of a layaway. If there was no room at the end, they could go to phase 2. They could go to a wall vault for the meantime until there was space at the end, sort of thing. Lafayette Cemetery number 1, it was built in 1833, and it's located in the Garden District.
This is the one.
This is it. And it's on the National Register of Historic Places. So I think one of the few rainy days that we had, we were walking around it. It was sort of suited it, you know, to be going around a cemetery in. It was
soggy weather.
Yeah, very soggy weather.
Okay, now we're going to turn our attention to Katrina, because I think it's a kind of an interesting story. Essentially, there was a major failure in this area, which I will show you in the next slide. Here is the French Quarter again, and the failure is occurring somewhere up here. Now, hard to realize, you can see the green coloration. This area is a bowl. It's sort of like a great big bowl. And this, you remember I told you along the edges of the river was the high ground. This is where the plantations were along here and up here, where the high ground was, but the low ground was in here. And so what happened was a major failure occurs somewhere here. And I'll go to the next slide. This is where the major failure occurs. Here's the crescent, right? Now, this is the main part of the French Quarter. Here are where the failures occurred, along here. And the major one was this one. And the water flooded into the town. So as a result, this whole area was under about 20 feet of water. Even though the people were put into the stadium, the water began to fill even the stadium, you know. So it was a real tragedy. Okay, now let's keep going
Do you want
here. Yes, you can tell your story.
Okay. Katrina, the worst of it happened on April 29th, 2005. It was a Category 5 hurricane, and there was a mandatory evacuation. The Superdome became the shelter of last resort.
In the middle of that bowl, I was
Yeah.
telling you.
So for those who couldn't leave. Now, after we took a tour, one of the tours of they called the Katrina tour, and the gentleman who was running the tour, he didn't really want to show anybody the real devastation that is still showing in many areas, the poor areas of New Orleans, the black areas basically, for where the black residents. He really didn't want to go there, but I guess enough people like us had said, this is what we want to see. Anyway, one of the things that we were told was that there could have been a lot more evacuation of the people, you know, when Katrina was being warned about. Only they had hundreds and hundreds of buses to take people, but they didn't tell the bus drivers to stay behind. The bus drivers were among the people who left, so there was nobody to drive the buses.
Wow.
And 1,836 lives were lost. Half of them were senior citizens who had no way of getting out of the city. So there was also Hurricane Rita on September 22nd, where the levees were breached again. Maybe you can talk about the cause of the levees breaching.
Yeah, I will in a minute. These are the pumps, by the way. You can see that they exist now and they were there before. Absolutely enormous pumps for taking water out of the city if in fact there was any breach, but it was just totally overwhelmed. So I'm going to go to the next slide here, if I can get my act together. And this is the argument, that essentially the I wall and T wall differences, this is the newer one, this is the old one. They're saying that the walls now need to be strong walls anchored in a great big deep area. The original walls were too shallow. And so the argument has been that essentially, and I'm going to encapsulate it, the costliest engineering mistake in American history. The United States Army Corps of Engineers designed the levee and flood wall system incorrectly, and contractors failed to build the system in places to the requirements of the Corps of Engineers contracts. The Orleans Levee Board made only minimal perfunctory efforts in their assigned task of inspecting the city's vital defenses. Legal investigations of criminal negligence are pending. And so it just shows you how, unfortunately, this whole thing was botched.
So,
And
can I add something?
yes,
there?
sure.
So this great, basically this great wall, this levee that was supposed to go so many feet down into the ground, it was only built about half the distance that it was supposed to go. So the water could get under it, beneath it, out the other end, and then knock the levee down. So there was a lot. The Army Corps of Engineers has a lot to answer for in this, and also the people who are on the Orleans Levee Board, who were supposed to do the investigating, they didn't do anything, and they have a lot to answer for too.
So this is just a shot of the cemetery area for the 1,000 souls that were lost, and these were just memorials that we went to see. I thought this was rather a neat little designation. It shows the fleur-de-lis of New Orleans, but it also shows a swirling hurricane underneath, and that's part of the memorial, and I thought that was rather good. And now, this is one of the actual shots, one of the pieces that he showed us in the area, but most of the places he showed us had very little to see in damage. Most of it is actually flattened, and what I've done here is I actually took a photograph using Google Earth to show you the devastation. Now you can see the lots, the shape of the lots, and people have obviously kept mowing them or keeping the grass down, but they're essentially a lot of them are just empty. There's nothing there. And in fact, a lot of the people refuse to return to this area because those that live in this area, if they want to get food, they have to take 3 buses to get to a supermarket. They're that far away. There are no shops. There are no facilities in this area where most of the blacks live.
Can I add something?
Sure.
Yeah, as I said, the tour guide didn't really want to get into this very much. It didn't make New Orleans look too good. So when we talked to other people afterwards, they were saying that, as John said, why would people want to come back to this area where you can't buy food? There are no schools open, so the kids can't go to schools. There are no hospitals nearby where if they got sick, they could go to hospital. And all these things that we take for granted that are, you know, we go 5 minutes from here and you've got all of these things. There were none of these. And in fact, there was something I saw on the television the other day that was a woman being interviewed on Channel 2 for some program, and she was saying that I have to take 2 buses and a trolley, a streetcar, they call them, streetcar, to get to a supermarket to get my food. And what she was doing was she was trying to use one of these lots and starting to grow vegetables and try and sell them. And people were coming to her because they were the only fresh vegetables they had access to.
And this area here that you see is, we didn't see it. I actually had to go onto Google Earth and to take a streetcar view and then photograph it for you to see it. We did not see this. I saw it they didn't show us on the tour. Now, I felt I was being somewhat cheated on that tour because they didn't want to show us that aspect of New Orleans. This is, again, you can see the devastation. It's just, these areas were all filled with houses. Just absolutely chock-a-block. Now, all gone. A
But there
few
might
of
be,
them,
but there might be one house like
Like
that
this.
one that was almost untouched, and then everything else around them completely
washed
obliterated.
away.
Now, this is a monument. We had to take a picture of this. This is the monument for, in memory of Katrina, showing you the sort of thing that happened then. It's a memorial.
And this is, we're almost at the end here now, guys. You've been very patient. This is the streetcars that we talked about. And we were fortunate enough to be on, as I say, St. Charles Avenue, where the streetcars went by, and we could get out of a hotel, walk across the road, catch the streetcar just right there. Took us right into the city for the grand sum of 40 cents. We saw, we went, a few other places we went. We went to the World War II Museum, which is well known. I think an absolutely marvelous museum. It's where the Higgins, apparently, yes, the Higgins boats.
Yeah. Some of you gentlemen especially will know about the Higgins boats. Did you know about the Higgins boats? Okay. A gentleman by the name of Andrew Jackson Higgins was a New Orleans boat builder who had invented the Eureka, a boat that could ply the bayous with its shallow draft. And when the war began, he got a U.S. contract to build workboats there. The LCVPs, called Landing Craft Vehicle Personnel, were built of wood in assembly style, and the president, was it Truman?
No, President Roosevelt.
It wasn't President Roosevelt. Maybe it was President Roosevelt. Said that without this Higgins boat, which brought the people ashore from the big boats, without the Higgins boat, the war would have been lost. He helped win the war.
Oh, one more thing, I thought, when I was down there, Sunday morning, a bunch of us guys from the base were walking through, and they had these Bible thumpers all over. See, in the corners, Bible thumpers. So I'm listening, I said, gee, I've never seen anything like this before. So one was breaking down his table and everything over. I said, Reverend, I said, I'm a Yankee from up north. I said, I never seen anything like that preaching on the corner. He looks at me, he says, well, that's all right. He says, Christ said to his apostles, go to the highway and byways and preach the good word. He didn't say anything about a church. I apologize to walk away.
Right. Okay, so the American designed and built Higgins boat helped win the war. I wanted to know that. Okay.
All right, that's more or less it. What else have you
I've
got?
got. So this is the St. Charles streetcar. And when we first got there, we called them, trolleys or whatever, and we were told in no uncertain terms, they're not called trolleys, they're not called trams. My city back home in Wales, when I grew up, we had trams. That's what we called them. Trolleys they call in Boston, but in New Orleans it's streetcar. You know the streetcar named Desire? Desire was a stop on the streetcar route then. I don't think it's there anymore, but anyway. But the St. Charles streetcar, this one, the line began in 1835 and was called the Carrollton Railroad because it carried passengers from the French Quarter to the resort town of Carrollton. It is the oldest continually operating streetcar line in the world and is on the National Historic Landmark list.
Valerie, when you call them streetcars, now, are they gas-powered or are they on
Electric.
tracks?
Electric.
All
Are they, they're on tracks with the
Yes.
thing up above?
Overhead,
Okay,
electricity.
that's what I was wondering, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a trolley or a streetcar, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Now the Canal Street streetcar line, a different line, was the neutral ground that separated the proud Creoles in the French Quarter from these brash Americans who arrived after the Louisiana Purchase. The original residents, the Creoles, were not very happy to have these usurpers, Americans, coming in after America bought this whole amount of land. Mule-drawn carriages were the first transit system along the Grand Boulevard, followed by electric streetcars. But by 1964, buses had replaced the streetcars. 40 years later, streetcars were built by specially trained locals to resemble the first Pearly Thomas models and began running again in 2004. Can you talk about that line, the neutral zone?
Yes.
Okay.
The Canal Street was known as between the French and the American quarter as the neutral zone. In other words, the zone where nobody crossed. So the streetcar avenues that are run down the main streets of New Orleans are known as the neutral zone. They call that track, wherever it is in the city, they call it the neutral zone, because it comes from that original name on Canal Street, the neutral zone. It's hard to realize too that, and this is a bit of a digression, but it's sort of interesting. The history of Haiti is rather interesting. When the French Revolution was occurring, the blacks were encouraged, and mulattoes were encouraged essentially to farm their own lands. The slave state gradually evolved towards a non-slave situation during the period of the French Revolution. But as soon as Bonaparte came into power, he wanted to return this to the colonial and slave state that it was originally. And in the process, of course, the black generals finally threw out the Bonaparte group, primarily because they died of disease, most of them. Originally, it was something like 30,000 French troops were sent into Haiti, with originally the idea of actually capturing southern Louisiana back for the French. But once they were down to something like 10,000 troops, in other words, 2/3 of them died in disease in Haiti. As a result of all of these blacks essentially killing off large quantities of French, the French in Haiti moved to New Orleans. And this is why the population of New Orleans expanded very rapidly in the early 1810s, 1820s, because there were huge numbers of French that came in from Haiti as well.
Can I mention about the Louisiana Purchase?
Sure.
Okay, you'll have heard of the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. Now, this came about in a very much a roundabout way. Thomas Jefferson had offered Napoleon $2 million for just New Orleans and Florida. Napoleon didn't respond. So James Monroe was sent to Paris, prepared to up the bid to $10 million just for those two parcels, Florida and New Orleans, that's all. But Napoleon astounded them by offering the entire Louisiana territory for $15 million. That's about 4 cents an acre, or $7 for the whole of New Orleans. Technically, Spain still owned the land because of an unsigned deed. However, it was straightened out in the council room in New Orleans, the Cabildo, where deeds were transferred first from Spain to France and then France to the United States. So luckily, the Louisiana Purchase was a very good deal for America.
The Louisiana Purchase covered a wide
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
area
yes,
of all
huge
along the
amount.
Mississippi.
Most of the central part of the United
Right.
States, yes, correct.
Huge.
So,
Just mention about the French market.
oh yeah, French market.
One of the places we really enjoyed, or I enjoyed shopping, was the French market. We haven't got any pictures that we took there, but when I got home I realized that the coffee I use all the time is French market coffee. Get this in Market Basket. And it's got a picture on the front saying French Market. I'd never looked at it that closely. There it says New Orleans famous French Market. And there it is, right on the can. And it's not inexpensive. It's something like $7 for a can, something like that. But you only use half as much as you normally would for coffee. So instead of 2 scoops, you put 1 scoop in, or whatever. So it's well worth it, and I love this. It's coffee and chicory. Does anybody know why chicory ended up in coffee? No? Okay, chicory is the root of the endive plant, which is roasted. Now when coffee became scarce, what people did was they roasted the root of the chicory, ground it up, and added it to extend the coffee. And it became a taste that people really liked. So you see chicory, coffee and chicory, and that's where it came from. So there's the French Market right on the front, which we enjoyed very much.
Well, I guess that's the story.
Anybody have any questions?
Questions? Any more questions? Okay, well, we're done.
You're gonna finish it off, or?
I got